May the 8th, 2008. It was a quiet morning in the mountain town of Woodland Park, Colorado. 18-year-old Joshua Maddox stepped out of his front door. The guitar-playing dreamer, outdoorsman, and beloved son, saying simply that he was going for a walk. He never came home. And when his body was finally found, the scene was as shocking as it was mysterious. Joshua Maddox was born on March 9th, 1990, in Woodland Park, a small city perched high in the Colorado Rockies. Josh grew up surrounded by his tight-knit family, his father Michael, his sisters Kate and Ruth, and his older brother Zachary. Josh was a bright, gifted kid. After a few years of homeschooling, he thrived at Woodland Park High School, where teachers described him as a clever and introspective young man who loved to write, draw, and make music. He played guitar constantly, often sitting outside with his friends, strumming and laughing under the pine trees. But tragedy struck in 2006 when Zachary, his older brother, took his own life at the age of just 18. The loss left a deep mark on the family and on Josh. Still, those who knew him best said he carried an unusual lightness for someone who'd known such pain. He was kind, funny, and always ready with a joke or a song. By 2008, Josh had graduated high school and was figuring out his next steps. Some of his friends were heading to college. Others were finding work. Josh talked about traveling, playing music and writing. He wasn't in a rush to settle down. On the morning of May 8th, 2008, Joshua woke up, ate breakfast, and told his sister Kate he was going for a walk. It was nothing unusual. He often wandered the woodland paths near their home to think, play music, or just enjoy nature. But that night he didn't come home. When another day passed with no word, his father began calling his friends. None of them had seen him. I got up one morning and Josh wasn't there, Josh's father Michael said later. Then he just never came home. The next day he still didn't come home. I called his friends, but nobody had seen him. After 5 days, on May 13th, the Maddox family filed a missing persons report. Police and volunteers searched the surrounding area, including trails, rivers and campgrounds. Flyers went up around Woodland Park and neighbouring towns. Nothing turned up. At the time, investigators had no evidence of foul play. Joshua had no enemies, no known mental health issues, and seemingly no problems. Without leads, his case went cold. His sister Kate later wrote that she chose to believe he'd left on purpose. Since Josh was 18, she said, it was reasonable to assume he may have decided to leave town to start a new life. I always expected him to come back one day, maybe with a wife and kids. Friends said he'd always talked about travelling and about writing, about chasing life beyond their small town. For 7 long years, his family searched, imagined, and hoped. But it was all in vain. In August 2015, that hope came crashing down. Literally, when a construction crew began demolishing an old property to make way for a new development. Workers with Murphy Constructors began tearing down a cabin on Meadowlark Lane, less than a mile from the Maddox family's home. The cabin, built in the 1950s, had once been part of a local ranch property. Over time, it had become abandoned and had fallen into disrepair and had been uninhabited for over 10 years. Its owner, Chuck Murphy, occasionally checked on the property to make sure no squatters had moved in, but otherwise left it untouched. In an interview, he said, "The place was damp. It smelled like hell. There was raccoon poop all over the place. We really had no reason to go in there except to tear the building down." That afternoon, as demolition progressed, a worker began removing bricks from the chimney. When he looked inside, he froze in shock. Within the shaft was a human body, bent into a fetal position and upside down, wearing nothing but a thermal shirt. The authorities were called immediately, and an investigation of the site took place. Dental records confirmed what no one wanted to believe. It was the remains of Joshua Maddox. The discovery stunned everyone. How could this poor teenager have ended up upside down in a chimney, in a building so close to home, with no sign of how or why he got there? The official explanation would come quickly, but the more people learned, the less sense it made. The autopsy, performed by coroner Al Bourne, revealed no broken bones, no gunshot wounds, no knife wounds, and no drugs or alcohol in Joshua's system. Bourne concluded that Josh's death was accidental, likely the result of hypothermia after getting trapped. The theory was that Joshua, curious and adventurous, had climbed onto the cabin roof and attempted to enter through the chimney, possibly trying to get inside to look around or take shelter. The thinking was that he slipped, got stuck, and was unable to free himself. Bourne said, "We've come up with the most plausible explanation, and it will remain an accident. He did come down the chimney, that's our conclusion." To his mind, it was a tragic but simple story. But as more details surfaced, that explanation started to fall apart. Chuck Murphy, the cabin's owner, had his doubts from the start. He told police that years earlier, he had a heavy steel rebar mesh installed into the top of the chimney to keep out animals. Unfortunately, police hadn't seen this mesh since all the metal had been removed from the building prior to demolition. "There's no way that guy crawled inside the chimney with that steel webbing," Murphy said. Murphy also noted several oddities inside the cabin. First, the fireplace opening had been blocked by a large wooden breakfast bar, ripped from the kitchen wall and propped against it. Second, Joshua's clothing had been found near the fireplace, pants, socks, and shoes, as if he had removed them intentionally. Lastly, the chimney itself was pretty narrow, not wide enough for someone to easily climb through, especially head first. If Josh had somehow entered from the roof, he would have had to first remove all of his clothes other than his thermal shirt, climb up onto the roof, somehow remove the rebar mesh that was built into the brickwork, and then drop down into the narrow chimney head first. Murphy believed that Joshua had been inside the cabin first, and that someone might have placed him in the chimney intentionally, either while alive or after death. The case was briefly reopened to review these discrepancies, but ultimately the accidental death ruling was still the conclusion they came to. Locals couldn't shake their unease. How could a strong and healthy young man get into such a position without anyone else being involved? As the story spread online, new information began to surface, or at least speculation. Several people claimed to have contacted police with potential leads about a man named Andy Newman, an acquaintance of Joshua's. A Reddit post years later reignited interest, written by someone who said they'd gone to school with both Joshua and Andy. They claimed the two had been seen spending time together shortly before Joshua disappeared. Andy, the post said, had later bragged about putting Josh in a hole and had left town soon after. No part of these accusations have ever been confirmed by the press or law enforcement, but what is known about Andy Newman is profoundly disturbing, as you'll soon find out. After leaving Colorado, Newman reportedly travelled through the Southwest. In May 2009, Andy journeyed to New Mexico, where his travels took a murderous turn. While socializing in a bar in Albuquerque, Newman befriended a man named James Wellito. Later into the night, Newman asked if he could crash at Wellito's apartment for the night, and his new friend obliged. Also living in that apartment was a disabled man called Anthony. James was both his friend and caregiver, and they had lived together for a while. The situation quickly escalated into tragedy when James, returning from a shower, discovered that his disabled friend had been fatally stabbed. Newman was nowhere to be found and had clearly vanished from the scene, immediately implicating him in the brutal homicide. This initial New Mexico incident led to a warrant for Newman's arrest, which was executed barely a month later in Texas. In June 2009, Newman was apprehended after a homeowner took him to the police for trespassing on his property, where he was found with the homeowner's teenage children. Luckily, the kids had the sense to call their dad, and the dad had the sense to take Andy to the police station, because once Newman's fingerprints were taken, authorities quickly matched him to the open homicide case in Albuquerque, as well as a burglary in Seattle. During the ensuing interrogation, Newman allegedly admitted to a second, unrelated murder of a woman in Taos, New Mexico, claiming he had killed her and disposed of her body by stuffing her into a barrel. But he never mentioned anything about Joshua Maddox. Strangely, the confession about the woman stuffed into a barrel was never seriously looked into, since a culprit had already been taken into custody for that crime. Regarding the fatal stabbing of the disabled man, one Anthony Schneider, Newman had his plea hearing on September 9, 2009, where he appeared not to be in his right mind and didn't seem to know what was going on. In light of this, his defense attorney, Robert Work, entered a plea of not guilty on his behalf. 3 days later, on the 12th of September, Newman tried to escape from jail and had those charges added to the existing murder charge. The trial was ongoing from September 2009 to May 2011, while Newman was allegedly in and out of mental institutions. Just as real progress was being made on the case, everything was suddenly dropped when the sole witness to the case died. It turns out James Wellito, Anthony Schneider's housemate and caregiver, had been killed in a bar fight. This, along with the mental instability of the accused, led to an immediate end to the case on May 12, 2011. Over the following decade, Newman's rap sheet grew longer. In 2012, he was arrested in Utah for multiple charges, including assaulting a police officer. In 2015, he was charged for trespassing and burglary in Florida. In 2018, he was arrested again in Texas for assaulting the police. And in 2019, he was charged with attacking a detention officer while in prison. Despite this disturbing criminal history, no evidence directly ties Newman to Joshua's death, and no official investigation ever pursued the lead. Even now, years later, the story of Joshua Maddox continues to haunt Woodland Park, not just because of how he died, but because of everything that doesn't add up. How could a teenager vanish for 7 years only to be found that close to home, in a place people who had walked by countless times? How could he have entered the sealed chimney? Other than his thermal shirt, why were all of his clothes removed? And who moved the breakfast bar? The official story remains: Joshua climbed into the chimney and died accidentally. But for those who knew him, and for anyone who's heard the facts, that conclusion feels incomplete. At least Joshua's family finally has a grave to visit, but not the answers they deserve. And the question still echoes through the pines of Woodland Park. What really happened to Joshua Maddox, the boy in the chimney?